Happy Juneteenth Eve, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Stir Crazy, brought to you by the Real News Network. I'm your host, Kim Brown. I'd like to welcome you all to episode number 56. We will win. We have a lot of important news to get to, including the huge Supreme Court victory that rules that people affected by DACA will be allowed to remain in the country. We're talking about 700,000 lives impacted by this pivotal decision by the nation's highest courts. And speaking of courts, on the state level, the Illinois Supreme Court had an interesting ruling. The Chicago Police Union was trying to have police complaints older than 5 years completely destroyed. The union argued that per the contract with the city of Chicago, this practice must take place. But the Illinois Supreme Court said that that was actually not in the public interest. Yeah, that sounds like a bit of common sense. And we'll dissect that ruling a little bit later. Also, don't forget, the Rona, very much still out here, very much still jumping on people. We're seeing record hospitalizations in states that did not enact the most stringent of stay-at-home orders. Heck, in the state of Texas, 9 mayors in some of the largest cities across the state asked Governor Abbott whether or not they could implement mandatory mask wearing in public places, and the governor said no. Meanwhile, Texas is now looking at its, I believe, 7th consecutive day of record COVID hospitalizations. Well, what does this all mean as we are now officially in the midst of a recession? Unemployment is through the roof, not to mention a lot of the bonus unemployment benefits, that extra $600 a week that was coming from the government. Well, that runs out at the end of next month. What is everybody going to do? We're going to have a nice, robust discussion about that as well. And of course, we always want to hear from you in the chat, in the comments. Of course, welcome to everyone who's watching via Twitter on Periscope. Bienvenidos. We are glad to see you out here today. And you can always hit us up via email, stircrazy@therealnews.com. Well, right now it's time to bring in our fantastic panel. Once again, we always like to bring a nice, diverse slate of guests with fantastic opinions and experiences. We'd like to welcome again to the show, Neill Franklin. Neill is the director of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. We're also joined with Genevieve Montinar, the co-host of Why You Should Give a Fuck, a brand new show right here on The Real News. It airs Wednesday evenings. And Andrew Corkery. Andrew is our visuals and research producer. He is also one of the most well-read people on our staff. So panel, we are glad to see you in the house today on this nice Thursday.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Wonderful. So the first place we're going to start, actually, let's start with the Supreme Court with this really historic and such a crucial, critical decision for hundreds of thousands of people who were brought here to the country as children from outside of the country. The Obama administration enacted DACA, making it so that people who were brought here illegally as children don't have to face deportation. They can work, they can go to school, they can be Americans, basically. And the Trump administration, specifically the Department of Homeland Security, just rescinded DACA, just arbitrarily. And the Supreme Court has now confirmed that the elimination of the DACA rule, the court ruled it to be arbitrary and capricious. And Andrew, I know you've been looking at this decision coming from the Supreme Court today. What does this mean overall?
Yeah, so basically the Supreme Court, like you said, ruled that the Trump administration cannot carry out its planned shutdown of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that Obama created 8 years ago. Chief Justice Roberts was the swing vote in a 5-4 decision, which dealt a massive blow to President Trump on the issue of immigration, which was obviously a major focus of his domestic political agenda. Roberts wrote the decision basically in favor of what happened today in the Supreme Court, and he basically wrote that the government failed to give an adequate justification for ending the federal program. Now, the Trump administration could, in theory, try again to shut down the program, DACA, by offering a more detailed, legally robust explanation for the action. So basically what happened was that the Trump administration was essentially lazy and just going to Jeff Sessions and saying, yeah, you should just come in and, arbitrarily end this program, when in reality, you didn't have a robust legal justification for doing so. And once Jeff Sessions and the Justice Department decided that they're ending the program, Trump administration says, well, of course we have to end the program, because now the Justice Department, the law says we have to end the program. So at the heart of Roberts' majority opinion, he basically held that the Trump administration had broken the laws governing federal agencies when he decided to end DACA in 2017 under Jeff Sessions, because the memorandum that basically recommended its termination did not address crucial parts of the policy. So basically failing to provide a robust judicial and or administrative reason for why the program was ending. So after the Department of Homeland Security ordered the program ended, lower courts basically allowed DACA to keep going on, letting young people in the program reapply every 2 years to remain in protection from deportation. And children of illegal immigrants were allowed to remain here if they were 16 when their parents if they were under 16 when their parents brought them here to the U.S., and if they arrived before the year 2007. So basically, DACA defenders said that this whole federal ruling by the Trump administration didn't give a detailed explanation, which is exactly what the Supreme Court said, and that the action would affect, like you said, hundreds of thousands of people. And instead, they said the government simply just declared the program was illegal. And what basically happened was, in this 5-4 decision, is that the Trump administration's legal justification was not adequate for ending the program, and he could essentially try again and try another legal justification. And if that legal justification is found constitutional, then the Supreme Court could, in theory, uphold it. So Roberts basically sided with the liberals, the 4 liberals on the court on a technicality. But in theory, the whole Supreme Court case was about a technicality, which was, the way in which the Trump administration ended the law was wrong. And just for a quick background, that's basically it. It's a bit convoluted.
Well, I was going to say, it is a little bit convoluted, but at the same time, it is a little bit simple because, Neill, basically what the court ruled is that the Trump administration rescinding DACA, and I'm reading from the Twitter timeline of Kimberly Robinson. She's a Supreme Court reporter for Bloomberg News. She reports that the Department of Homeland's decision to rescind DACA was arbitrary and capricious under the Administrative Procedure Act. This is what the Roberts decision read. And basically what it means is how I'm interpreting this, that the court decision is based on the Administrative Procedure Act, not equal protection, which means the Trump administration could go back and simply fix the mistake and undo DACA. So because this was ruled basically on a technicality by the Supreme Court, if the Trump administration would get off their lazy ass and actually do some legal work, which I'm not hoping that they do, but my point is this seems to be a fairly simple remedy if the Trump administration were so inclined to try to pull this again, basically, except this time do a better job on their paperwork.
Yeah, and I believe that they will probably make that attempt to do it. Knowing Trump and how he goes about things, he's going to pull out all stops to try to probably make that happen. I would hope that time would run out. We're getting into the summer now. Campaign season is ramping up, and we're going to be November's going to be beyond us, here with us really quick now. And I hope that he runs out of time. I hope he gets, well, let me just say this, he's easily distracted. So maybe he'll get distracted with the campaign and we'll move beyond the election. Then we don't have to worry about it, and we'll have a new administration in place and we can get back to some reasonableness and how can I say, get back to the real office of the president and the reality show that we're in.
Absolutely. I don't think that Joe Biden, were he to be elected to the White House, would make deporting immigrants a priority. But then that's a sort of a silly thing to say, since Barack Obama deported way more people than many of his predecessors.
You never know. You never know what an incoming administration will do. You can never be sure of what they will or won't do. But I will say that it's going to be better than where we are and what we've been dealing with over the past 3.5 years. There's no doubt in my mind.
Genevieve, the focus on many of the DACA recipients, at least the media tends to focus on many of the Latinx kids who came here, were brought here by their parents as kids. But over 1 million DACA recipients, not a million, but a significant amount come from Asia. Another significant amount come from Africa and the Caribbean. This Supreme Court decision, although it seems maybe perhaps tenuous because it does would require a technicality fix on behalf of the Trump White House. But a lot of people are going to be able to rest easier in the short term, at least, given what the court decided today.
Yeah, this is almost like a weight taken off their shoulders. Like this, they've been in limbo for the past few months now, waiting for this Supreme Court ruling on what's going to happen to their DACA status. So now that is secure for the time being, they can rest a little bit easy. But I think it is important to note two things about DACA. One, DACA is really a Band-Aid for our large immigration problem here. DACA doesn't offer a pathway to citizenship. That's something that's still in discussion in Congress and in political circles. DACA doesn't answer that. It's just a Band-Aid, and only impacting young people. So like things like with the passage of the Dream and Promise Act, which was something that the Senate had taken up, I believe, earlier this year, which would have provided a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients, things like that. Those are things that we're going to have to bring up, hopefully, in the future.
From the comments, Kiana Rainey says, Trump will refile. He's going to lose a lot of his supporters if he doesn't. That's why he was put into office, to execute that white supremacy playbook. Yes, ma'am. Red also says from the comments, reminder, even Reagan supported amnesty for immigrants. He knew that immigrant labor force was carrying the economy on their backs, which is true. But we haven't seen any amnesty pledges really coming, certainly from not Trump. I don't think Joe Biden has amnesty in his immigration platform, though I will need to recheck that because he did put out a lengthy, detailed thing of all his policy positions. But, speaking of courts and major rulings, the ruling coming out of the Illinois Supreme Court has to do with the Chicago Police Department. So what happened with this decision, which was released today, I think it was a 7-1 decision for the high court in the state of Illinois. So the Chicago Police Union was trying to have police complaint records expunged, not only expunged, but actually destroyed if they were older than 5 years. Now, the head of the Chicago Police Union claimed that this was in the contract. However, the city of Chicago has gone through a number of different court decisions, and each time it came back that the city did not have the right to destroy those records because they are part of the public record and a huge component for public interest. But now the Illinois Supreme Court agreed with the city of Chicago, and the union is less than happy. Neill, I wanted to get your take on this because, the union argued that it was part of their contract, that this was something that an arbitration, hearing was the outcome of keeping this particular clause within the contract between the union and the city. But the fact that the justices said that, maybe it's not in the public's best interest if they are not clear about a particular pattern of conduct or behavior and a history of complaints for any given police officer with the Chicago Police Department. What is your take on this decision?
Well, I think the courts were absolutely right in their decision on this, because when you look at government business, the record keeping of government business, you just can't arbitrarily decide that, okay, after 4 years, we're going to get rid of this data and this information. And even though they consider it a personnel file, what we're talking about is the business of police officers within the community. We're not talking about their personal records. We're not talking about their phone records and information regarding their health or family members. We're talking about records for how they are conducting business, policing within our communities. And you just can't arbitrarily get rid of that information, even though you have a so-called union contract with the city. I don't think they have the right to do that by law. When it comes to government business, we have to keep records, and that record keeping, that information would eventually go into the Hall of Records, and it must be available for retrieval at a later date. In generally speaking, as it relates to these contracts that police have with cities and towns across the country, they need to be dramatically reworked. In Maryland here, we need to change the law regarding the police officer's Bill of Rights. I mean, that's the bottom line. Transparency is extremely important. We have cities already across this country that are changing these transparency laws and contracts, and we need to move on that quickly. The people need to know what these officers are involved with when it comes to excessive force, when it comes to corruption, when it comes to lying on official documents and in the court. We need to have access to that, and they need to be unsealed.
Neill, let me follow up. I want to read to you what the head of the Chicago Fraternal Order of Police, he is the president. His name is John Catanzara. Now, this was what he said before the decision was issued, but he said, quote, this is according to, I'm reading this from WBEZ.org. He said, quote, if you have a not sustained complaint, why should that stay in your file forever? What is your take on that?
The answer is plain and simple.
Describe to us what's a not sustained complaint.
A non-sustained complaint is an officer receives a complaint. It could be excessive force. It can be involving discourtesy toward a citizen or a number of things. And then there's an investigation. The investigation can usually take place at the supervisory level. So it could be the sergeant or it could be the lieutenant who conducts the investigation of that officer, or it could be kicked up to internal affairs if it's serious enough. The problem is that the police cannot police themselves. We can't trust them to police themselves. That's the importance of having an outside entity such as a review board that has teeth, that has subpoena power, that can make decisions that are adhered to by the administration and police departments. The union is in the business of protecting its members. And I got to say this is very important. We have a serious race issue among the ranks within policing. And for instance, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but at 12 noon, the Prince George's County Police Department had a press conference where they are being sued by a number of, the Hispanic police union, as well as the Black police union down there. They're being sued. Because here we go again with disparity issues when it comes to race in promotion, in assignments, the way discipline is handled out. And Kim, if we can't remedy, if we can't solve racial problems within our police departments among its members, we got a serious problem when it comes to how policing occurs within our neighborhoods and in our streets regarding race. This has been happening for decades. And the union is the main problem here. The FOP, for instance, is the main problem here. The FOP is the reservoir for discrimination and for racial problems within policing internally and externally, but mainly internally in departments across this country. And we've got to do something serious about union reform. And if it takes what happened in Camden, New Jersey isn't perfect. For a number of reasons, they disbanded that police department and reconstructed it. And in doing so, they were able to get rid of the union, which has reconvened, but it looks completely different. These contracts are a problem, and some of the laws in the states protecting police officers is a severe problem, and we need to do something about it.
Genevieve, when you hear that the police union in Chicago wanted to have old complaints older than 5 years destroyed, not just put in a warehouse somewhere, filed in an old filing cabinet. No, they want to destroy them as if these records never existed if they were over 5 years old. And, you know, we saw that tirade that the head of the police union for NYPD went on, I think it was last week, where he said, you know, we demand respect. You know, we're being treated unfairly in so many words. Then why in the world are police interested in destroying records of complaints from the public if they're so proud of the job that they're doing?
Yeah, it looks shady, and it is. It looks like they're trying to hide something. These records will help the public establish patterns and find out who the bad actors are within, say, like a police department. Why they would want to hide these type of records is, you know, they know they're doing something wrong, and they just don't want people to find out. Like, these records serve a big purpose in public interest, because then you know, like, who to look out for if there was some type of, I guess, offense filed against one person. You can look at their record and see, oh, they have a pattern of committing excessive use of force or abuse against people. This is like important information for the public to know, and for them to want to hide and go even farther, destroy the records, it's kind of ridiculous.
Andrew, I think this is a perfect segue into a story that you and I were talking about earlier, how in Washington State, the King County Labor Collective has told the police union to step off, sort of piggybacking on what Neill was talking about. Tell us about what happened out there with the police union.
Yeah, so basically amid really heightened scrutiny of police unions, kind of like how we're outlining here, and their place also within the labor movement more generally, the King County Labor Council voted this past Wednesday to expel the Seattle Police Officers Guild, which represents roughly about 1,300 officers from its ranks. The Labor Council, which collectively represents more than 100,000 workers inside King County, which is the county where Seattle is located, generally provides advocacy for labor issues and endorses, you know, political candidates. Its vote to expel the union symbolizes a really stunning pace and impact of all these protests against police brutality in Seattle and across the world since George Floyd was killed. And just to give some context here, this is an organization, the Labor Council in Washington State, that just 2 years ago, the same Labor Council vehemently lobbied for the Seattle City Council to ratify the police union's contract. And for example, the executive treasurer secretary at the time, by the name of Nicole Grant, said at the time 2 years ago that, quote, "It's time for supporters of police reform to back off and allow workers to have their raise," end quote. And nationally, you know, member unions have increased calls to kick the International Union of Police Associations from its ranks of the AFL-CIO, and the AFL-CIO has so far resisted. So this is a growing trend that we're seeing, and to my knowledge, the situation in Seattle and King County is, you know, the only real tangible outcome we have in terms of a labor organization, you know, kicking out a police unit and/or a police bargaining unit from its ranks. And just to show like that sort of societal turbine headspin, basically, is just like, you know, being thrown on its head in terms of 2 years ago, this same organization said that they need to advocate for police officers who have a number of, you know, issues in Seattle. They advocated for them to get a pay raise. So, I mean, this just shows what the protest movement can really do and what the increased social understanding of the complex problems that we're dealing with has on society.
Indeed. Please, Neill. Yes.
Yeah. So when it comes to, so your listeners, your average listener will be able to understand this when it comes to non-sustained complaints. The analogy is this. Many people within our communities get arrested by the police over and over and over again for things, and are never convicted of it. You know, probable cause is bad. There is no probable cause for whatever reason. You know, police officers have it out for someone, so arrested over and over and over again. Now, that arrest is there for the public to see. These court records are there for anyone to go in and see. And it's extremely difficult for the average citizen to get that arrest wiped off of their record. And even if it is, there are databases that store that information where you can pay $14.95, run somebody's name, and see all the times that they were arrested, despite there being never a conviction for any of these arrests. So why should we not be able to look at a police officer's record, right? Excessive force, discourtesy, corruption, lying, whatever it may be, sustained or non-sustained. Why should we not be able to have access to that information? I mean, if the average citizen cannot get rid of these arrests where there's not a conviction on their records, and every time they get stopped by the police can pull it up and see, oh my God, this person's been arrested 10 times, but never convicted. But yet that information is there, and the average citizen can find that information out too. Why should we not have access to these police officers misbehaving in our communities?
Is it some sort of, does it, I mean, it ought to if it doesn't already, but does it reflect poorly somehow on the officer's performance? If he has a lot of civilian complaints in their file, does it affect the amount of pay raise that they could get? I mean, it has to affect them negatively to some extent. It should. At least they wouldn't be, right.
It should. They have a very strong argument. If there's not a sustained complaint, if we're talking about non-sustained complaints, they have a valid argument for that not to affect their evaluation, job assignment, or anything else. And the union is going to back them on that. So in a nutshell, it does not affect them. But when it comes to a citizen with an arrest record, whether there's a conviction or not, there could be no convictions. But that employer has access to those arrests. They can just go online to one of these databases and see the times that this job applicant has been arrested, and they're not going to get hired. That employer is going to move on to the next person. We know that.
I think it also speaks more broadly to the justice system in general. You probably have people too that are actually, arrested and are convicted, but have to accept a plea deal through no fault of their own, in the sense that, they have no money and or legal or life capacity in order to defend themselves, and want to get through the ordeal as quickly as humanly possible, knowing that maybe at some point in their life they could get that expunged. But at least during that particular time, you have people pleading out to stuff that they didn't even do, because the justice system is inherently flawed and does not actually give these people their day in court. So, and also too, when it comes to the police unions, you have a situation where, who's holding them accountable in the sense of the police union? Like, what makes a complaint validated versus a complaint that, is not validated? Who is judging that? Like you said, Neill, we need to have more, police accountability in the sense that we have review boards that have teeth. How many places around the country have that system in place that's robust enough where people can say, oh yeah, okay, then we're holding these police officers accountable? And so who's actually judging that? Is it people, within the police department who are ultimately connected to the police union? I mean, that sounds like basically a kangaroo court at that point.
Yeah.
Gang, so there was a story related to what Neill, something that Neill brought up earlier in the conversation, and that's the issue of implicit bias. So this article that I came across in the San Francisco Examiner, the headline reads, "Implicit bias trainer finds, quote, extreme degree of anti-Black sentiment within the San Francisco Police Department." Now check out how this went. So this person is or was a manager from the Department of Human Resources working for the city of San Francisco. His name is Dante King. In Dante's I quit email to his coworkers, he went on to make a lot of accusations where he went on to say, quote, "The degree of anti-Black sentiment throughout the SFPD is extreme." He also went on to say, while there are some at SFPD who possess somewhat of a balanced view of racism and anti-Blackness, there is an equal amount, if not more, who possess and exude deeply rooted anti-Black sentiments. Neill,
Yeah,
we have
he's
long
right.
seen, well, yeah, but we have long seen examples of entire white supremacy units within large police departments. I'm thinking of the LAPD here. Most recently, we've seen officers in Philadelphia who have been sporting tattoos, that demonstrate either Nazi symbolism or some sort of white supremacist symbolism. So white supremacists as an ideology adopted by police departments or police individuals is not new, but and anti-Blackness clearly is not new. But how do all these racists keep getting hired? Because it's clearly not something that could exclude you from being a police officer. Are cops screened on their racism and different perception of people of different racial backgrounds before they are hired?
It depends. It depends upon the agency. In many agencies, they are not. The screenings are not in depth enough. But you got to understand something. Again, here comes the history of policing in this country. Understand again that it was never designed for the benefit of Black people. It was born out of slave patrols in the South, property protection for the wealthy in the North. Basically, it's all about protecting the property of the wealthy. Understand that during my lifetime, now I'm not going to tell you my age, but during the 40s and 50s, and you only have to go back to the 50s, 1950s, police in this country and cities across this country, Black police officers, as they started coming on the force, they couldn't carry a gun. They couldn't even ride in a patrol car. They couldn't police in white neighborhoods or arrest a white person. And we're only a few decades off of that. Now understand that policing is kind of like a family business for many of these folks. Their fathers, their grandfathers, their great-grandfathers were police officers, and they just keep it going. They keep it going. Who's doing the screening? Who's doing the hiring? Who's letting, this person by and that person by? I can tell you from working in the Maryland State Police and working in the Baltimore Police Department, in training and human resources, there was a time when I was with the Baltimore Police Department, my last year there, that I had to ensure that every candidate folder came across my desk, which was unusual as the chief of human resources, because I couldn't trust some of the investigators. So I had to spend time going through each folder to make sure, number one, that we were bringing in some Black candidates who should be brought in, but at the same time, making sure that people weren't being hired just because they're the son or grandson or granddaughter or daughter of someone, in particular in the police department. So, yeah, it's not difficult. We've got a steady stream of folks coming in to our police departments because that's what their fathers and grandfathers have done. And again, we're not that far off of, again, like I said, when Black police officers couldn't even ride in a patrol car.
Genevieve, so this is another interesting caveat about the San Francisco Police Department. They had been under review from the Department of Justice because of a history of racism and racist practices. Most recently, the DOJ, according to the reporting from the San Francisco Examiner, the Department of Justice reviewed the San Francisco Police Department, after a racist text messaging scandal and several controversial police shootings of Black and Latino men rattled the SFPD. As of Wednesday, the SFPD had completed just over 16% of the 272 recommendations for reform issued by the DOJ, including 6 related to bias, and of which the implicit bias trainer said that these mofos is still racist as hell. You can't train away racism. I hope that throughout the course of this discussion about police, not just here on Stir Crazy and on the Real News, but the broader societal discussion reveals that you can't out-train racism. It's in you. Once it's in you, it's in you. And if you're allotted with the public trust to be out there making arrests and harassing people potentially and hopefully serving and protecting, we can't have any space for racists. So how do we get rid of them?
Oh, yeah, we start by observing what people are doing and take the complaint seriously and root them out that way. And then we also start by being more selective of who we let onto the force in the first place. It feels like there isn't a strong level of selectivity of who gets to be an officer and who doesn't. Of course, there are like different trainings and different tests that you have to go through, but these, these implicit biases, like racial attitudes towards the communities that you're policing, those are all things that also need to be assessed. That shouldn't be like an afterthought or a discussion happening for diversity training. That should be one of the requirements before even getting onto the force in the first place. It should be prioritized by the department and by the Department of Justice as well.
And Andrew, when different police departments come under review or consent decree, et cetera, they are given a task of things to accomplish in order to improve. But it seems as though these recommendations either never get implemented or they are slow as hell to even begin to be implemented. I don't understand why progress does not have a timetable, because it totally should.
Yeah, I mean, like when you see something like the Justice Department coming in and intervening in a police department in the country, there's a number of different ways they can do that. They can make recommendations, and then they could also not have teeth in terms of implementing those recommendations. They can just say that they've addressed, some of the issues within the department, and then it's up to the department and whatever societal and or political infrastructure in that particular area that has to control whether or not the actionable and tangible processes and changes in that department are carried out or not. So, I mean, I think it gets to a broader issue that we don't have the teeth necessary in order to fundamentally change some of these departments unless we do something similar to like what Camden did, where obviously they have a lot of problems still. They still have a really high arrest rate in Camden and all of these other things. But, at least you're starting from the ground up. You're starting with the intentionality that you're going to create a more robust form of policing that's going to be held accountable to a certain extent, that's going to include people from those communities. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about Camden is that you still have a situation where it's a lot of these white officers coming in and out of Camden and not actually living in that community and not being of that community, to try to deal with the community distrust that tangibly takes place in those communities for very justifiable reasons, in the sense that there's an over policing of those communities and that the people's voices aren't heard in the critique of the overall policing system as a whole.
Speaking of critiquing the policing system, we are seeing a number of public school systems take up the mantle and end their contracts with their local police departments for having armed school resource officers in public schools. And teachers unions are becoming more and more vocal on this very point. Andrew, can you fill us in on what the teachers unions are saying about getting cops out of public schools?
Yeah, so this Jacobin article here is really interesting. I mean, a major lesson from that the Jacobin article points out is that the recent wave of teacher strikes was necessary for unions to bargain for the common good of the entire working class. And what they mean by that is by joining, joining the nationwide protests against police brutality and demanding police-free schools, teachers unions have basically shown that they've taken that lesson to heart, because this is a tangible example in which they're demanding more of the society and demanding more protection for people of the working class more generally from police. So, for example, on June 11th, 2 weeks after the protests began against police brutality, the United Teachers of Los Angeles published a statement called "Imagine Police-Free Schools with the Supports Students Deserve." And it basically called for the elimination of the LA police, a separate, basically creating a separate department that serves the Los Angeles United Schools District. And the statement reads in part, and this is very interesting. It says that, quote, "This is not only about police as people, it's about policing as an inappropriate institution in our schools. Police must be removed from our schools," end quote. And just for example, a couple other things. I mean, on June 5th, the Chicago Teachers Union published a similar statement demanding the cancellation of Chicago Police Department's contract with the Chicago Public Schools, and funding for basically practices instead of more robust practices instead of punitive ones, and the placement of social workers and student support personnel in every school as among their demands. And in New York City, a similar thing occurred. And the CTU, the Chicago Teachers Union, began applying pressure on Mayor Lori Lightfoot, the school district, and other local power brokers in the city all over social media by tweeting out and sending out messages on Facebook with the hashtags police free schools, cops out, CPS, and counselors not cops, and defund the police as well. So teachers unions are basically signing on to the police free schools movement. That's not only, a critical political development that's occurred, in my belief, it's also it could begin to break down the school to prison pipeline, in that the teachers are no longer a part and parcel of the system that's taken hold of our society, that's allowed officers such well integrated status into the schooling and education system as a whole. So I think that's what we should look out for as this movement kind of continues to burgeon and we get more information about what's actually happening.
Neill Franklin, you didn't want to tell your age. I will gladly tell my age, sir. I'm 41 years old. I graduated high school in 1996, and I went to high school in a predominantly white area in Columbia, Maryland. And if there was ever a cop at my high school, it was because somebody was in trouble, right? Like, the cops weren't at school every day. That's preposterous. Why would the police be at school every day? If the police are there, it's because they are coming to collect someone for something. It's not, they were not a mainstay in public schools when at the time that I was in school. What brought about the rise of having armed school resource officers in public schools in the first place? And in your opinion, and in your experience and observation, has this been a successful endeavor? And does it deter whatever I imagine school administrators and the public at large imagined it would deter?
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar to a lot of other things that we're experiencing when society seems to not want to deal with something in one particular way. The police sometimes end up with it. Just as mental health, right? Because we don't have the proper level of services within our neighborhoods and communities to assist people who have mental health issues, the police end up being the ones that are called when someone is having an episode. So it's the same thing with schools. We got to a point where we have shifted responsibility at some level from school administrators to the police when one of our children are acting out. And so we call the police. You've seen it. We have videos of police officers being called to a school to put handcuffs on a 7-year-old. Who would allow that? How can any school administrator allow that to happen? How can any police officer be in their right mind to do something like that? But it's become somewhat of a norm for us. Well, who do we call for this? Call the police. Well, neighbors are having a little bit of a disagreement. Some dog, your dog crapped on my lawn. Let's call the police to settle it. Come on, folks. We in society have to step up. And in schools, I think Andrew is right. When we're talking about shifting resources, shifting funding from law enforcement, from corrections, from these places, obviously education is one of those. We need the counselors in our schools. We need a system and services in our schools that do a better job of connecting the parents to the teachers and to the students in the school so that we have more of a community there. Anything that we can do to resolve issues with our young people in a school setting, absent the police, is a win. And that's what we have to get back to. We have to get back to the administration having processes in place where they can deal with children who they would consider, problematic from time to time. Because once you get the police involved, that child's future is, for the most part, and we've seen the data on this, pretty much ruined. They're going to end up sooner or later within a criminal justice system.
Yeah, and just to add on to that quickly, Neill, I was just going to say that, when we talk about defunding the police, there seems to be like some narratives getting misconstrued and stuff like that when people generally bring that up. And I think that just to clarify it, what we're talking about is the reallocation of resources from an institution that is fundamentally not dealing with the crux of societal issues at large into funding programs and or other agencies that are intrinsically motivated towards dealing with the societal issues that we have in a tangible way outside of just throwing people in jail. So I think, that distinction really has to be made. And that's part of what this movement to get rid of the school resource officers and to replace them with people who are social workers who understand the psychology and social setting that is created in a school environment and what issues and ills can be brought about in that context, who are not motivated by just stifling and stopping the problem immediately through force if necessary.
But you know what
Absolutely,
bothered
Andrew.
me, I think the most about armed police being in schools or even school administrators calling the police, Genevieve, like I have family members who are in their 20s and 30s, and they would tell me that if there was a fight between two students at high school, the police would get called and parents would have the option to press assault charges against teenagers, which to me sounded way over the line, considering that's what you do in high school. I mean, whether or not people disagree with it, whether or not you think fighting is a good way to resolve conflicts, no matter what you think, teenagers are going to put their hands on each other, whether or not parents like it or not. Like fighting, it's a rite of passage, I would imagine, in many places around the world, not just in the United States. And to have the cops called for a kid fight.
If I were growing up in this time, I wouldn't be sitting here speaking to you today as a police officer, because I would have been in and out of jail as many times as I fought in what we call junior high school back then. In high school, it was just, and I tell you, a couple of those times I ended up best friends with the person I was fighting after it was all over and said and done with. We ironed out our differences and we moved on. But the police were never called.
But in some cases right now, Neill, that's not even an option. Like the cops are going to get called almost automatically. Genevieve,
cops
talk
are
to us.
already there.
Oh, well, duh. Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Of course.
Some of them are already there. They're waiting by. Just waiting for something to happen.
And I mean, and that is the large complaint, or one of the large complaints from Black parents, is that, our kids don't get to be kids, right? They don't get to just go through the typical growing pains and conflicts and learning how to deal and work with people and learning how to fight too, defend yourself. That's an important skill that should not be lost on anyone. And sometimes people get it, they learn it in school, like Neil Franklin did. Genevieve, what's your take on this?
Yeah, to get the criminal justice system involved when kids are so young, like it sets them up almost for failure in a way, because you get in trouble, you're in high school, you're barely an adult, and then you end up in the criminal justice system, and then you go in and out of jail, and then it's hard for you to get a job, it's hard for you to continue your education. It basically ruins your life from the beginning. You never even have, like you said, you never really even have a chance of succeeding. So it's not good.
You're right.
It doesn't solve the problems. It just creates more complex problems to be dealt with later. And then the society refuses to deal with them, whether it be through, employment issues, whether it be through, racist policing systems that fundamentally go after minorities in our society. It doesn't deal with an educational aspect in which college is affordable for people. Like, I'm a white male, and it was still difficult to go to college and afford all the student loans and everything like that. I can't even imagine, to think about if I was from a minority community, that was particularly lower income, that was systematically patrolled by police and undermined by the state. I mean, it seems damn near impossible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Black Man 903 in the comments says, y'all think the police are racist? The military is way worse. John Custer says, you folks help me to understand the bigger problems and help me imagine a way forward. Thank you. Well, thank you, John. We appreciate you all listening. Y'all keep that chat moving. I wanted to switch gears for a second, gang, because obviously we're still in the middle of a global pandemic. I can't believe the pandemic sometimes takes a backseat to the other crazy shit that is happening in this country. But yes, coronavirus, COVID-19 is still very much out here, still very much jumping on people. We are seeing troubling spikes coming out of at least 16 states across the country, with several states, including Florida, Texas, Arizona, reporting record hospitalizations and record number of positive cases coming back really in the past week or so. But the other part of the COVID-19 pandemic has to do with the economy. And it is official now. We are in what folks are calling the coronavirus recession. The economy peaked back in February, and then it immediately hit the skids. We have got very high unemployment in this country, and we have not received a whole lot of assistance in terms of the workers, the citizens, have not received a lot of assistance from the government, at least not relative to the trillions that corporate America received. So if you are right now collecting unemployment, that extra $600 a week that you are getting, that's going to end at the end of July 31st, the last day for that $600 unemployment benefit. But they really are trying to encourage people to return back to work as the pandemic is peaking. We haven't even gotten out of the first wave yet, say most public health officials. So folks, I wanted to bring you the story really quick. This came from out of Arizona, where I mentioned they are experiencing another peak in COVID-19. A security guard who worked at a local casino. You know what? I'm just going to let the broadcaster, the reporter, tell the story. Let's have a look at that, Dwayne.
1 month ago, Gila River Lone Butte Casino in Chandler reopened during the pandemic. Robert Washington worked security and needed to be paid in order to afford his insulin. Within 2 weeks, he contracted the virus, and days later, he passed away. His daughter says this was preventable.
He raised her, taught her, and cared for her. Lena Washington's bond with her dad was undeniable. And in the end, she was the one caring for him over the phone.
Dad, I love you. I love you. Need you to listen to the nurses.
That was their last conversation. Robert Washington, a cancer survivor, was a security guard at the Chandler Casino and told his daughter when it opened again on May 15th, he needed to go back to work to get paid so he could afford medication and have insurance benefits. Lena said on May 16th, he called her.
She was absolutely fearful for the future. There was no social distancing, as he explained to me. There was no active sanitation.
Things only got worse from there. On May 30th, her sister told her their dad tested positive for COVID. Days later, he was admitted to the ICU and eventually passed away.
This matters. My dad mattered. And now I'm doing something about it.
Lena is angry that Governor Doug Ducey and other leaders are watching these Arizona COVID case and death numbers skyrocket since reopening and not doing more to protect people. She says to those who aren't wearing a mask in public or taking it seriously, remember her dad and the entire Washington family whose world has been turned upside down.
The arrogance that people think it can't happen to them. I'm telling you it can, because it happened to me, and it didn't have to happen. I'm at a loss for words that there are politicians and people in power who are allowing people like my dad to die like this.
The man had to return to work in order to afford his insulin, life-saving medicine that he needed, that he had to pay for. Returns to work. They're not social distancing at his job. They're not taking proper sanitation procedures at his job. And within 2 weeks, he contracts COVID and shortly thereafter dies. There is so much wrong and fucked up to unpack out of the story. Andrew, I want to start with you because where to begin? Where we live in a country that does not provide health insurance for people who have diabetes, that you have to, you have to go buy insulin, something that can save your life. And if you don't have the money, what's the alternative? You just die. or you're rationing your insulin. And for this gentleman who is already in a vulnerable group, given his age and his race, Black people are dying from this disease at twice the rates of whites, especially in the older age groups. And the people who at his job, his place of employment, are not taking the pandemic seriously, not having people wear masks, not social distancing, not taking sanitary. Well, we are in a dire predicament. And I don't know what this is going to look like in 6 months. It already looks bad right now with over 100,000 people, and that number steadily climbing. I think we're at 117,000 people dead from coronavirus in the US, 2 million infections, and everybody has to get back to work. Andrew, I'll let you begin.
Yeah, I mean, that is really, really tragic. But it reminds me very much of what Martin Luther King said later in his life, and that, we need to have a revolution of values. And I hope that this moment implores people to do that. And the tragic story of what happened to her father and what's happened to countless people around this country, because that he's only just a microcosm of what's actually going on in America right now. And one of the things that Martin Luther King said that stuck with me, my whole life. I mean, I'm 28 years old, but one of the most powerful things I've ever heard him say is that, a country that continues to spend more money on military defense than programs of social uplift like Medicare, Medicaid, medical insurance, particularly for the disadvantaged and the poor, that's a country that's approaching spiritual death. That's the trajectory that we've been on since Martin Luther King, laid out that statement, more than, 55 years ago. So this is incredibly tragic, but I hope it can be harnessed as a catalyst for people to actually understand what tangibly has to happen in our society for us to progress and move forward. I mean, more than anything, the coronavirus has, laid bare and brought upheaval upon the social contract of our society and the societal constructs that we live in, and not allowing us to access Medicare for all is a human rights issue. Not allowing us to fund that program so that we can actually have a sustainable lifestyle on this planet where we don't have to live in fear of dying because we can't afford medical drugs in the richest country in the history of the world. It's morally unconscionable. I mean, it's just spiritually obscene and morally profane. So I don't know what to add to it other than that, but I hope that it gives us catalyst for change.
So many people are upset about states reopening because they know that the first ones who have to return to work are Black and brown people. And Black and brown people are the ones dying from this disease at greater rates than everybody else. Neill Franklin, I saw that story, and I swear to God, I wanted to throw things. Like, I was so furious for Mr. Washington, for his daughters, and just furious at the elements of our society, ranging from the casino, determined to start making money again, to the governor of Arizona, determined to allow these for-profit entities to start making money again at the expense of lives like Mr. Washington.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what happens with this big push in places like Arizona for people to return back to work, where these corporations are going to reopen their doors? For instance, my son works as a trainer for a gym. And what happens when their bosses say, okay, it's time to come back to work? And people are like, well, I don't feel good about this because, that's an environment that like a casino, like the story you just showed, where it's a high probability that I may contract COVID-19. Now, what if they do not return to work because of this? What if the employer doesn't step up their game and provide the proper protections for their employees, and then they contract it? Or if they refuse to come back to work, are they going to be fired? What protections do they have? Again, my son has been out of work. Luckily, he's got a good support system, because even though he applied here in Maryland for unemployment, he's yet to receive it. And it's been a long time. We've got to do better. We are not a compassionate country. Although we like to pretend that we are not. Because if we were, we would have universal health care. We're just great pretenders. We're seriously not a compassionate country. And I believe, I have no doubt in my mind that we are headed towards spiritual bankruptcy in this country.
Genevieve, Neill raises a good point, especially talking about the delay in paying out unemployment benefits for people who have filed many weeks ago. There was some video circulating social media yesterday of the line at the unemployment office in Kentucky that some said was going to take people 8 hours from the back of the line to get to the front of the line. And these people weren't there to look for unemployment checks. They were there trying to simply speak to a person, speak to a human, because they have not been able to get any relief either over the phone or via the web portals. So people are really struggling right now, and they are being forced out the door back to work, because if you refuse to go back to work because you're scared of COVID-19, that's not a good enough reason for you to still keep collecting unemployment, at least in a lot of the eyes of these states that have reopened. So what needs to happen here? How can people better protect themselves, since clearly their jobs and the government are not out to protect them?
Well, people have to.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to drop that heavy question on you.
No. I think really and I'm going to echo what Andrew and Neill said. It's what we have to do is examine the systems that we're in, the economic system, the justice system, the healthcare system, all of the systems, and really take a step back and say, like, is this working? Is this working for me? Because a lot of the times that we just continue on, like, oh, this is how we've always done it for the past 50 years. We're just going to keep on going because, like, this is the American way. I think what this pandemic is doing is highlighting, like, okay, this is not the best way. It's not the most effective way. And then actually it's harmful. So, like, what are we going to do to kind of change up those systems and make it work for us?
Yeah, just to add on to that real quick, I just think the ongoing financialization of the pharmaceutical industry in this country is unconscionable. And the fact that has accelerated since the 1980s. I mean, you have a situation where some of these pharmaceutical companies, along with other companies as well in other industries, are getting bailed out. And what are they doing? They're investing all of that money in stock buybacks to boost the stock price up in the stock market. This fictitious reality that only a select few of, like, really well-off people get to participate in at large. And they're reinvesting it to get money for their shareholders. They're not investing it in research and development. They're investing it in that and advertising, sending us ads saying about how we're all in this crisis together, when that's complete fictitious nonsense and bullshit. It's literally not based in reality. It's propaganda nonsense. And so the problem is you have all these people trying to buy into that now, and the corporations are getting bailed out. But in reality, you see what happens when people don't have tangible ways to deal with reality. They go out on the street and they demand change, like is what's happening all over this country. And so if the government wants to get its shit together, and not have people out on the streets every single day, they need to actually act and do something tangible to make people's lives better. And until that happens, you're going to get complete pandemonium in the streets every day. So nothing's going to change with that.
Gang, I want to thank the panel. I was reading some of the comments that people were dropping in the comments. Red, I'm gonna let you get the last one here, sweetheart. Red says, it could be a spiritual rebirth that we have here in the US if we convert the war economy to medical, diplomacy, economic systems. Yeah, all we have to do is divert some streams of income into some different directions and we could be right on point. But there's too many evil forces at play that want to keep so many of us, the majority of us, oppressed. And on this rat race, as Bob Marley sang about, we don't want to be in the rat race no more. We got the ox race, we got the dog race, we got the human race, but this is the rat race we find ourselves in. And I want to get off that hamster wheel. Listen, panel, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Appreciate it as always. Neill Franklin, Andrew Corkery, Genevieve Montinar. We appreciate y'all joining us today on Stir Crazy.
Thank you so much.
And listen, of course, we just want to remind everybody, don't forget, tonight is the premiere of a brand new episode of the Police Accountability Report, one of my favorite shows here on the Real News Network that starts at 9 p.m. Join Stephen Janis and Taya Graham. I was going to say join Stephen and Taya, but yes, join them tonight for the new episode of Police Accountability Report right here on the Real News. That's our time. You guys have a good rest of your evening. We will see you tomorrow. See ya. Bye.